All I did was plant a few tulips, bright, cheerful, harmless. But within days, I got a formal notice from the HOA threatening legal action over flowers. I laughed at first, until I realized they were dead serious. What they didn't know? I had one powerful ally. When I first moved into this neighborhood, it felt like the peaceful escape I'd been craving. Quiet streets, friendly waves, and that false promise of suburban calm. I even studied the HOA rulebook like it was gospel, just to be safe. So when I planted a few flower beds, I didn't think twice. Tulips, lavender, a little splash of color near the porch. It brought life to my home. But then came the letters. First a warning, then a fine, then another. The HOA claimed I'd violated some vague clause about unauthorized landscaping. I thought it was a mistake until I got a certified letter threatening legal action over flowers. At first I brushed it off as ridiculous, but after talking to a few neighbors, I discovered a pattern. This wasn't just about tulips. The HOA had a history of targeting people who didn't fall in line. That's when I realized I wasn't just fighting for my garden, I was fighting a bully. And I wasn't backing down. It didn't stop with a single fine. That was just the opening shot. First came the passive-aggressive notes. Slipped under my door, no names, just phrases like, "This isn't a botanical garden," or "Some of us prefer uniformity." I thought it was a joke, maybe some cranky neighbor with too much time. But it escalated quickly. A few days later, I started noticing a woman lingering near my yard, clipboard in hand, phone out, snapping photos. Always around the same time in the morning, always acting like she just happened to be out for a walk. It didn't take long to realize this was the HOA president herself, Karen. Yes, her actual name. The stereotype writes itself. She started citing me for the most absurd things. My marigolds were suddenly labeled a visual nuisance. The lavender? Public hazard attracting bees. They even claimed the flowerbed's colors didn't match community-approved aesthetics. Then came the big one, a $500 fine for what they called non-compliant mulch. Non-compliant mulch. I wish I were joking. At this point, I began to keep track. I created a folder, every notice, every email, every fine. And then I started comparing. You know what I found? Karen, the same woman leading the charge against my supposedly offensive garden, had garden gnomes, plastic flamingos, and bright teal patio furniture in full view of the street, all against the very same rules she claimed I was violating. But when I brought it up to a board member, I was told it was all grandfathered in. The more I looked, the more cracks I found. There were special permissions granted to her friends, secret meetings without minutes, new policies implemented without community votes, and fines being funneled into projects no one remembered approving. It was like the HOA had become Karen's personal fiefdom. One neighbor told me she got fined for wind chimes being too loud. Another had to repaint her mailbox 3 times in a single month because Karen claimed the shade was one Pantone off. One man even got a citation for overwatering because runoff briefly crossed onto the sidewalk. And yet somehow Karen's property had never received a single violation in over 3 years. So I dug deeper. I started knocking on doors, asking questions. I found out the same people on the board had been re-elected for 5 straight terms, despite barely anyone remembering any elections. Turns out they changed the bylaws quietly, reducing quorum requirements and making it nearly impossible for new members to even get on the ballot. And then I discovered something that really set off alarm bells. Missing funds. Over $40,000 in HOA dues had been allocated to a beautification fund, but there was no record of how it was spent. No invoices, no receipts. Just a vague budget sheet that might as well have been scribbled in crayon. I compiled everything. Documents, testimonies, photos. I was sitting on a full exposé. Still, the harassment didn't stop. In fact, it got worse. Karen had someone from the board show up to inspect my backyard, without notice, without permission. They claimed they had the right to enter my property to verify a complaint about excessive plant growth. When I told them to leave, they threatened to call the sheriff. That's when I stopped playing defense. I made one phone call to my cousin, Valentina Reyes. You might have heard of her. She's a state senator. We weren't close, but we'd kept in touch over the years. And when I told her what was going on, she didn't laugh. She went quiet. Then she said, "Send me everything." So I did. Every document, every photo, every recorded conversation I could legally obtain. And what I didn't know at the time was that this wasn't the first HOA she'd heard complaints about. In fact, there had been several in our state operating with the same shady tactics. Under the radar, abusing power, and silencing homeowners who didn't fall in line. Valentina told me one more thing before she hung up. "Don't worry, I'll take it from here." I didn't know exactly what she meant yet, but whatever it was, I knew Karen wouldn't see it coming. I always knew Valentina was sharp. Even as kids, she was the one organizing mock trials when the rest of us were playing tag. So when she rose through the ranks and landed in the state senate, no one was surprised. What did surprise me was how fast she moved the moment I called. She didn't waste time. The day after I sent her the folder, she called me back. Her voice was calm but firm, the kind of tone that meant someone was in serious trouble. "This isn't just petty power play," she said. "It's illegal. Flat out illegal." From there, everything shifted. Turns out HOA governance is more strictly regulated than most people realize, especially in our state. Elections must follow certain procedures. Financial transparency isn't optional, and enforcement actions, like fines or citations, are legally binding only if the HOA operates within compliance. Karen and her inner circle had violated nearly every major statute. No valid elections had taken place in over 4 years. There were no audited financials, no meeting minutes publicly available, and no documented member approval for policy changes. They'd been making up rules as they went, wielding power, collecting fines, and silencing anyone who questioned them. And now someone with actual authority had eyes on them. Valentina didn't show up in person, not at first. She had her legal team begin the paper trail, sending formal inquiries to the HOA board requesting documents, requests they were legally required to respond to. When the first letters arrived, the neighborhood buzzed. Karen tried to brush it off as routine oversight, but it was obvious she was rattled. The clipboard disappeared. The early morning surveillance stopped. Suddenly, the same HOA that had been on my heels daily went radio silent. Then came the emergency meeting notice. Posted late at night. No agenda. Just a vague line about community concerns. I showed up out of sheer curiosity, and so did half the neighborhood. Most of them people who'd been burned by the HOA at one point or another. Karen was there, pale and stiff, pretending to smile. You could feel the tension. One of her board members tried to reassure the crowd, saying everything was being reviewed and they were in full compliance. That's when I stood up. I asked a single question. "Can you show us the last election records?" The room went quiet. Karen stammered something about records being misplaced. Someone else asked about the missing $40,000 from the beautification fund. A third neighbor wanted to know why citations were handed out selectively. The more questions flew, the more evasive they became. It was falling apart in real time. A week later, an official notice was posted, this time from the state. A formal audit of the HOA's activities had been initiated under housing statute compliance. Every board member was being investigated for misuse of authority, failure to conduct legal elections, and financial mismanagement. That was when the real panic set in. Karen stopped leaving her house. Meetings were postponed indefinitely. Several board members resigned via email. And the most surreal part? I got a letter, not a citation, but an apology. A full reversal of all prior fines, with a vague note attached about internal restructuring. But I wasn't satisfied with just silence. I wanted resolution. Valentina called me a few days later. "They know the walls are closing in," she said, "but if you're willing, there's something we can do next." She explained that if I wanted lasting change, not just a temporary pause in harassment, we had to force a public meeting under the Community Rights Clause. A vote of no confidence. It had rarely been done before in our area, but it was possible, so I went door to door. I talked to the neighbor who had to repaint her mailbox 3 times, the elderly couple who'd paid thousands in fines for a fence 2 inches too high, the family whose party balloons had triggered a violation for non-compliant decorations. And we came together. In less than 2 weeks, we had enough signatures to demand a vote. The meeting was held in the community center on a rainy Thursday evening. It was packed. Karen tried to defend herself, tried to spin it all as a misunderstanding, but no one was buying it anymore. One by one, neighbors stood up and shared their stories, their frustration, their humiliation. Then we voted, unanimous. The entire HOA board was removed. Karen didn't say a word as she left. No smug glances, no last-ditch power move, just silence. And for the first time in years, it was peaceful. But as I stood there talking with Valentina on the phone afterward, she said something I'll never forget. You did more than plant flowers. You uprooted a system that thought it was untouchable. We weren't just cleaning up flower beds anymore. We were cleaning house. The final meeting wasn't just about flowers anymore. It wasn't about tulips, marigolds, or mulch. It had become something bigger, something personal for every resident who had been silenced, fined, embarrassed, or bullied under Karen's little dictatorship disguised as a neighborhood HOA. It started like any other HOA meeting, except this time, the air was thick with anticipation. The community center was full, standing room only. People who never bothered with HOA drama were suddenly sitting on the edge of their seats. They'd heard the stories, seen the letters, paid the fines. Now they were ready to see something change. I walked in with two people by my side. One was my neighbor, who'd been fined $200 for wind chimes that apparently made excessive clinking noises. The other was my cousin, State Senator Valentina Reyes, in a navy blue blazer sharp enough to cut steel. She wasn't there for show. She had a leather folder in one hand and determination in the other. Karen sat up front like she always did, confident, smug, maybe even ready to charm her way out. But when she saw Valentina enter, her expression shifted. A flicker of panic, barely concealed. She straightened her papers, adjusted her nameplate, and avoided eye contact. The meeting began. A shaky voice from one of the remaining board members tried to call things to order. We're here today to address recent concerns brought forward by some residents, he began, like this was all just a minor bump in the road. That's when Valentina stood up. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Under the authority of the State Housing Oversight Committee, she said, I am here to present findings regarding your HOA's violations of state compliance laws. She flipped open her folder. Any HOA acting without duly elected leadership, failing to maintain financial transparency, or enforcing fines without procedural legitimacy is in direct violation of Section 9.12 of the Housing Statute. The room went silent. People started whispering. Phones were recording. Karen interrupted. Of course she did. Excuse me, Senator. I believe you're mistaken. This is a private organization. Valentina didn't even look up. Ma'am, if you speak again without recognition, you'll be doing so under oath. Would you prefer to continue in a courtroom setting? You could hear the breath leave Karen's lungs. Valentina went on, outlining the timeline. The illegal citations, the lack of elections, the missing financial reports, the complaints filed by residents, and the board's failure to respond to lawful requests for documentation. Then came the kicker. I have here, she said, a notarized petition signed by 87% of current residents requesting immediate board dissolution and a call for a supervised election. Murmurs turned to claps. One guy in the back literally cheered. Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon, but Valentina wasn't done. She pulled out another sheet. And for the record, Karen Myers, according to the HOA's own billing ledger, you have failed to pay 3 consecutive quarterly dues, totaling $1,125. Under your own rules, that puts your voting rights and board eligibility into question. Karen opened her mouth, closed it again. Within a week, it was over. The entire board resigned. Not just Karen, but every member associated with her. Some left quietly, others left red-faced, escorted by legal notices. A special election was called, and this time it was done properly, with paper ballots, member oversight, and clear records. And guess who was nominated to join the new board? Me. I declined. I didn't want power, I just wanted peace. And I got it. Every bogus fine I'd ever received was officially voided. The $500 mulch charge? Gone. The warnings? Erased from record. I even got a letter of apology, signed by the new board president, who made it very clear that my flowers were not only acceptable, but encouraged as part of a new community beautification incentive. I planted more, of course, added snapdragons, daisies, even a tiny wooden sign that said, "Grow through what you go through." As for Karen, she moved out within a month. Word is she tried to sell her house fast, but the back dues, pending complaints, and public record of the investigation made that a tough sell. Last I heard, she's living in a condo across town, HOA free, ironically. But this wasn't just revenge, it was justice. Neighbors started talking again. The atmosphere changed. People smiled when they walked by my garden. One kid even left a thank you card in my mailbox, drawn in crayon, with the words, "Thanks for fixing the neighborhood." Valentina called me a few days after it all wrapped up. "You did good," she said. "You reminded people they don't have to accept being pushed around." I told her the same thing I tell everyone now. I never set out to take down the HOA. I just wanted to grow some damn tulips. But when people abuse power, whether it's in government, business, or a suburban neighborhood, it only takes one person standing firm to start a movement. And this time, that one person happened to know a senator. Things have been quiet since the fallout. Peaceful even. The new HOA board, transparent, elected, and shockingly reasonable, has been working to undo years of overreach. They even asked me to help rewrite the landscaping policy. I agreed, but only if they let me keep the gnomes. Non-negotiable. For the first time, the neighborhood feels like a community again. Neighbors wave, flowers bloom freely, and no one's lurking at 6 a.m. with a camera. We held a block party last weekend. No permits, no warnings, just music and laughter. But just when I thought the storm had passed, a neighbor pulled me aside with a hushed warning. Karen's been talking to a lawyer. Rumors of a defamation suit, claims of wrongful removal. It's all whispers for now, but we know her style. If she's planning a comeback, she won't play fair. Thing is, we're not the same neighborhood anymore. This time we're ready. Got your own HOA horror story? Share it in the comments. I read every single one. Like and subscribe for more real-life neighborhood battles. And don't miss the next episode. Let's just say, the HOA pool key scandal makes this look tame.